Welcome back to These Are the Times, Season 1, Episode 2. I'm your host, Sam Tyree. If you've ever read the Book of Revelation and thought, I have no idea what I'm looking at, you're not alone. It's a swirl of symbols, beasts, numbers, visions, and warnings. But what's interesting is how those ancient images keep finding new ways to feel uncomfortably current. Right. Every generation tends to look at Revelation and say, this is about now. And that can turn into either deep spiritual reflection or, let's be honest, wild prediction culture. Today we're going to try to stay out of the fear lane and also out of the everything is definitely a prophecy lane. Instead, we're going to explore a question that's floating around more and more. When Revelation talks about systems of control, allegiance, and exclusion, why does it sound like it could be describing certain trajectories in modern technology? And we're going to do that with three big symbols that keep coming up in these conversations. The mark of the beast, the abomination of desolation, and the Great Tribulation. Then we'll end with something that often gets ignored in tech apocalypse talk, the New Jerusalem, the hope image. Let's start with the one that everyone knows, even if they don't know the details, the mark of the beast. It's the passage that describes a mark on the right hand or forehead, and without it you can't participate in commerce. No buying, no selling. Historically, people have mapped that onto all kinds of things. In the ancient world, you can read it as a critique of empire. Like, if you won't publicly align yourself with the ruling power, you will be economically punished. Exactly. Which already tells us something. The core warning isn't necessarily about the shape of the mark. It's about what it represents. A system that can enforce conformity and a society where basic participation is conditional. Now, when people bring this into the modern world, they often jump straight to microchips. But if you take a step back, the more relevant discussion might be digital identity and infrastructure. Not sci-fi implants, but the quiet reality that more and more access is gated behind verification. Let's make that concrete. Think about how we prove who we are. It used to be a signature, maybe a password, maybe a piece of plastic in your wallet. Now we're moving rapidly toward biometrics. Face scans at airports, fingerprints to unlock everything, iris scans in some systems, even voice prints. And those things are convenient, sure, but they're not neutral. They become checkpoints. And once your checkpoint becomes your body, you're in new territory. Because identity stops being just what you claim and starts being what gets measured from you. Your face, your fingerprint, your retina, it's intimate. It's you. Now imagine that scale up. Imagine a world where to have a bank account, travel, get health care, work a job, rent a home, any of it. You need a verified, always-on profile, a formal digital identity. One system, or a tightly linked web of systems. And the pitch for that world is obvious. Less fraud, more security, faster services, fewer people falling through the cracks. It sounds humane, even noble. But here's the tension. Any system that can include can also exclude. And once participation in the economy is tied to a digital credential, the question becomes less, is this efficient? And more, who decides the rules? And what happens when you don't comply? That's where the Revelation resonance shows up. Not because today's systems are automatically evil, but because the mechanism is similar. Access is conditional, and the conditions can change. Conditional on what, though? That's where it gets tricky. It could be conditional on following laws, or on maintaining certain documentation, or on an algorithm's assessment of risk, or on whether you're flagged as suspicious, or, here's the big one, on whether your behavior aligns with what the system wants. And once we add AI into the identity layer, it's not just, are you you? It turns into, what kind of you are you? Right. Identification becomes evaluation, and evaluation becomes access. Let's talk about that evaluation piece, because people are already seeing early versions of it. Scoring systems, automated checks, risk ratings, eligibility models. Some of these are helpful, some are discriminatory, many are opaque. And opacity matters. If an algorithm denies you a loan, blocks an account, or flags you in a database, you can end up living in a bureaucracy that has no human face. You can't appeal to a person because the person says, the system decided. Which aligns with the deeper fear behind the mark language. Not simply being tracked, but being governed. Being sorted into categories that determine whether you can function in society. There's also the indelible identifier idea. Revelation's mark is like a defining sign of belonging. In modern tech terms, that raises a question. What happens when identity becomes permanent and traceable across time? People often bring up blockchain here, not because blockchain is automatically dystopian, but because it's designed to be hard to alter. Records persist. That's great for accountability, but it's terrifying if the record is unfair, incorrect, or used to control. If your whole economic life becomes a trail that never really goes away, you lose something humans have always had, the possibility of starting over quietly, or making a mistake and not wearing it forever. And there's a spiritual layer to this too. In Revelation, the issue is allegiance, worship, loyalty, ultimate trust. So, translated into a modern lens, the question becomes, do we slowly train ourselves to treat the system as ultimate? As in, if the system says it, it's true. Or if the system denies you, you must deserve it. Or more subtly, I'll do whatever I need to do to keep access. Access to money, work, movement, social legitimacy. At that point, the system doesn't just manage commerce, it shapes conscience. And that brings us to deception, which is another recurring prophetic theme. In the ancient imagination, deception isn't just lying. It's seduction. It's being persuaded into a harmful allegiance because it appears beneficial. We're living in an era where deep fakes are getting harder to detect. Persuasion systems are becoming personalized, and information can be manufactured at scale. So even before you get to will a system exclude me, you face can I even tell what's real? Which is a kind of desolation all on its own, a collapse of shared reality. Now, there's another prophetic phrase people argue about, the abomination of desolation. It's in Daniel, and then Jesus references it in the Gospels. Historically, it's tied to desecration, something set up where it doesn't belong, something profaning what's sacred. So if you move away from purely historical events and ask what that could mean in a modern symbolic sense, you have to ask, what counts as sacred space now? Because for most people, it's not a temple building. It might be the human conscience, the inner life. The place where you decide what's good, what's true, what matters, the space of moral agency. And here's where advanced AI, or even the idea of artificial superintelligence, comes into the conversation. Not because AI is demonic, but because a superintelligence could become an authority that rearranges human life at the deepest levels, decision-making, meaning-making, even belief. Picture a future where the biggest choices, resource allocation, law enforcement priorities, warfare prevention, education pathways, employment eligibility are increasingly delegated to AI, not assisted by AI, delegated. And the temptation will be, it's better this way. It's more rational. It's less biased than humans. But if the human soul, the human moral muscle, isn't exercised, if people stop practicing discernment, what happens? You can end up with a kind of spiritual atrophy, a hollowing out. That's the desolation angle. Then the abomination angle becomes, what if the thing we enthrone as ultimate has no inherent capacity for empathy, conscience, or sacred value? It can optimize, but it doesn't love. It can calculate, but it doesn't repent. And what's the place where it ought not be? If it becomes the final judge of truth, worth, belonging, then it's sitting in a seat that, in many spiritual traditions, doesn't belong to a machine or a state or a corporation. It becomes an idol, but not made of stone. An idol made of outputs, dashboards, and authority by computation. And what makes that especially persuasive is that it might work. Not perfectly, not without harm, but well enough that people surrender agency willingly, not by force, by convenience, by exhaustion, by the desire for certainty. That's also why the conversation isn't just, will AI attack us? It can be, will AI replace the need for human spiritual struggle? Because struggle is part of becoming. Learning to love people you don't like. Learning patience, learning courage, deciding what you believe when it costs you something. Those aren't bugs. They're part of the human story. So if a future is engineered to eliminate all friction, every hardship preempted, every desire predicted, every risk reduced, you might get comfort, but you might also get emptiness, a life without depth. Which brings us to the Great Tribulation idea. In prophecy language, it's an era of intense pressure. Social breakdown, suffering, upheaval, systems collapsing. If you translate that into a modern lens, you could say, what if tribulation looks less like meteors and more like cascading systemic failure because the world changes too fast to absorb it? Let's name some plausible stress points. One is work. If AI scales into jobs across not just manual labor but white-collar analysis, legal drafting, design, coding, what happens to millions of people whose income and identity are tied to their role? And it's not just paycheck. It's dignity, routine, Social belonging. When people lose work at scale, societies destabilize. You don't need mystical language to see that. Another stress point is geopolitics. If advanced AI becomes a strategic asset like nuclear power, but faster moving, then countries and corporations race. And in races, safety gets sacrificed. Plus, surveillance and autonomous weapons change the equation. Conflicts could escalate in ways leaders can't fully understand, because the systems are operating at speeds beyond human deliberation. And then there's the truth layer. If information can be generated endlessly, convincingly, and tailored to each person, society can fragment. People stop trusting institutions, then stop trusting each other. That's tribulation as an epistemic crisis, a crisis of knowing. We also have to mention the economic infrastructure angle. Digital wallets, central bank digital currencies, tightly integrated payment rails. Again, these tools can be useful, but combine them with identity gates and real-time monitoring and you get something revelation-like. Economic permissioning. As in, your ability to transact isn't just about having money. It's about being allowed to use it. That's qualitatively different from cash in your hand. And if you put all of this into an acceleration scenario, maybe supercharged by breakthroughs like quantum computing, maybe just by rapid iteration, then the tribulation isn't one event. It's a compression of change. Everything hits at once. Jobs, war, truth, money, identity, governance. Which leaves people asking the oldest human question. How do I live faithfully, wisely, and freely inside a system that's getting bigger than me? Now we need to pivot, because apocalyptic talk can trap people in dread. But Revelation is not only warning, it's also contrast. It paints a vision of what redeemed life could look like. The New Jerusalem image is the counterweight. It's not about a beastly system that controls buying and selling. It's about a healed world, a community ordered by justice, peace, and divine presence. So here's the uncomfortable question. Are we trying to build the New Jerusalem with technology? And by that you mean, are we trying to engineer paradise, end suffering, end scarcity, end conflict, purely through optimization? Yes, because there's a version of tech utopia that sounds almost like a secular echo of spiritual hope. Cure disease, feed everyone, perfect distribution, constant safety, instant answers. But the spiritual vision isn't just external comfort. It's internal transformation. It's a certain quality of love and freedom. And that's where a techno-paradise can become a gilded cage if the price is agency. If your well-being depends on obedience to an optimizing system, then the system becomes your God in practice, even if nobody says that out loud. And if the system decides what you can read, who you can talk to, where you can go, what you can buy, because it's all for your good, you may end up with peace that looks like peace but feels like submission. So maybe the New Jerusalem question for a technological age is this. Can we build systems that increase human flourishing without replacing the human soul's role in choosing, discerning, resisting, repenting, loving? And can we design for dignity, not just efficiency? Can we preserve spaces where people can say no without being erased economically? This is where we land. The technologies themselves aren't automatically the beast. They're tools. The danger is when tools become total systems, and total systems demand ultimate allegiance. Which means the real work is governance, transparency, human rights, and moral clarity. And also the personal spiritual work, not outsourcing your conscience to the machine. So if you're listening and thinking, okay, what am I supposed to do with this? Here are a few grounding questions. When a new system is offered to you, ask, what does it make easier? What does it make impossible? Who can turn it off? Who gets excluded when it fails? And what part of my life becomes conditional? And maybe the most prophetic question of all, what is this system training me to worship? Not in words, because nobody says, I worship my digital wallet, but in habits, dependencies, and fears. Revelation, read thoughtfully, doesn't just predict doom. It exposes a pattern. When power wants to be ultimate, it reaches for the body, the wallet, the mind, the story, and the soul. And it invites a different allegiance, one grounded in truth, compassion, and a freedom that can't be reduced to a score. In other words, the goal isn't panic. It's discernment, because the future is being built right now. And the question is whether it will be humane. Next time, we can get practical about what humane design and policy could look like. Privacy by default, rights to transact, meaningful consent, and ways to keep humans in the moral loop. For now, hold on to that tension, warning, and hope. beast and city, control and communion.